Imagine being thrown out of your own home, where every corner holds a memory just because you carry a new life inside you. This is not just a story of betrayal and rejection, but a surprising journey of redemption and the changes that love can bring to the hardest of hearts. Today, we will uncover the secret of a family that learned that true power lies not in wealth, but in the ability to forgive and love. Before we dive into this heartwarming tale, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to our story from. Now, get ready, because what happens next may change the way you see the true value of family and love. A tycoon cruelly kicked out his pregnant maid. Get out right now, you and your child. But what happened next left everyone in shock. Get ready for an intense story of redemption, secrets, and twists that can shake any heart. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment on where you are following this story from. The Cardoso family was synonymous with influence and wealth. At the top of this lineage was Mauricio Cardoso, a cold, calculating man with a capacity for indifference that could freeze any emotion around him. He did not believe in love and did not want to risk feeling it. At 38 years old, Mauricio ran the family business with unquestionable authority, something he had learned from a very young age. His father, Antonio Cardoso, a tough and authoritarian man, molded Mauricio to become a perfect replica of him. Ruthless, insensitive, and incapable of showing any sign of tenderness. Mauricio's younger brother, Vitor, was the opposite. Sensitive, dreamy, always seeking a different path from the Cardosos' strict traditions. Beatriz, their mother, lived next door to them, a strong and affectionate woman who, even when surrounded by so much coldness, never gave up teaching that love is the greatest treasure in life. However, Mauricio refused to listen. For him, love was weakness, an illusory idea that would only invite disappointment. And it was this conviction that led him to the biggest mistake of his entire life. Mauricio was not born cold. He was shaped that way. As a boy, he sought his father's recognition, longing for some compliment or gesture of affection. All he received, however, was indifference. "Men don't cry, Mauricio." Antonio Cardoso's harsh voice echoed in his mind. "Never show weakness, or you will be stepped on." In this way, Mauricio learned to stifle every trace of emotion. If he fell and hurt his knee, he would not cry. When Vitor ran to Beatriz's lap, Mauricio would move away. He grew up with a closed expression, always tough, as if nothing could get him down. His father prepared him to lead, but the result was the creation of a man as cold as a rock. Time passed, and Mauricio became exactly what Antonio wanted. An unattainable leader, a feared businessman who did not tolerate failures, and an inflexible boss who did not forgive mistakes. So he closed himself off from any form of affection. But not everything would last forever, because life knows how to impose hard lessons, and he would soon discover that even a heart of stone can crack. The Cardoso mansion was a palace worthy of admiration. Large rooms, imposing furniture, valuable works of art. However, behind all that splendor, the atmosphere was cold, just like Mauricio's heart. Beatriz tried hard to bring some warmth to that home, but it wasn't easy. Mauricio didn't allow soft feelings to penetrate that environment. One morning, she found him locked in the office, surrounded by folders, numbers, and an obvious coldness. "Son, we need to talk." He didn't look up. "If it's about business, we can. If it's anything else, I don't have time." Beatriz sighed. How many times had she tried to break down those emotional walls? "You can't live like this forever, Mauricio. Love is not weakness." He closed his eyes impatiently. "If you want to talk about love, look for Vitor. I have obligations to fulfill." She walked away, overcome with a sense of loss. She knew her son well enough to know that he had been trained to be this way, and she knew that soon, life itself would lead him to profound changes, in the worst possible way. Meanwhile, in another corner of the mansion, Mariana worked tirelessly. She had been providing services to the Cardoso family for the past 5 years. She had always been treated with dignity by Beatrice and Vito, but Maurizio barely noticed her. Mariana was used to it. People like Maurizio usually considered themselves too distant from people like her, but Mariana carried a secret, something that could change everything. In the last few days, she had been feeling a disturbing strangeness, dizziness, nausea, an unusual tiredness. Until one morning, while washing the dishes, a vertigo made her hold on to the sink to keep from falling. "Mariana, are you okay, my daughter?" Beatrice asked immediately. Mariana forced a smile. "Just a little dizzy, Donna Beatrice, but I'm fine." However, she herself suspected that something was wrong. The next day, she could no longer ignore it. She bought a drugstore test and waited for the result with trembling hands. When the 2 lines appeared, strong and decisive, she sat on the edge of the bed, her heart racing. She was pregnant. The questions came cascading down. What would she do now? She knew that Maurizio was terrified of children. He always reaffirmed that he would never have children, that children were noisy and useless. What if he discovered that a simple maid was pregnant in his house? But there was something even more terrifying. That child was not just a baby. He carried the Cardoso mark in his blood. Mariana closed her eyes, feeling the panic growing. She needed to hide the pregnancy as much as she could, but would she succeed? In the days that followed, Mariana did everything she could to hide it. She wore loose clothing and avoided attracting attention. But Beatrice, always careful, began to suspect. Mariana was acting differently, more absent-minded, more sensitive. One afternoon, Beatrice caught a glimpse of her running her hand over her belly in an almost imperceptible gesture of affection. It was enough to set off an alarm in Beatrice's mind. This was not just an impression. She needed to get to the bottom of it. However, the lie would not last. Mariana's secret was about to come to light. She tried to act naturally, but her previously unnoticeable belly was growing. Every suspicious look she received made her feel cold inside. How long could she still pretend that nothing was happening? That morning, Mariana looked in the mirror before going to work. Her skin was pale, and her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. She put on a loose black dress, hoping no one would notice her changing body, and left the room trying to look calm. As she went down the stairs, she had a bad feeling. Beatrice was standing at the end of the flight of stairs, looking at her strangely. "Are you okay, Mariana?" the matriarch asked sweetly, but also with concern. "I am, Donna Beatrice. Just a little down." She smiled, but she felt Beatrice studying her with disturbing attention. That night, Victor stayed up late in the living room, drinking a little whiskey and thinking too much about life. Beatrice passed by and noticed his expression. "Did something happen, my son? You look distressed." He almost blurted out the whole truth. However, Mauricio's voice echoed in his head. "Shame, Vitor. It's a weakness that has no place in this family." He didn't want to put her in a delicate position. "Nothing much, Mom. Just worried." Beatrice knew something was out of the ordinary, but decided not to press it. Yet, while Mariana struggled with her fear of the Cardoso family, there was another problem: the other employees in the house. Among them, Ilda, the cook, was the biggest gossip, always observing and commenting on other people's lives. And now she had a clear target: Mariana. "Have you noticed that Mariana is acting strange?" Ilda whispered to one of the maids. "Strange how?" "I don't know. She's more reserved, and I swear I saw her rubbing her belly the other day." The maid's eyes widened. "Could it be?" Ilda gave a smirk. "If it's what I'm thinking, the mansion will soon be in chaos." The rumors spread like wildfire through the halls. Before long, Beatrice had heard rumors. She tried to stay calm, but her heart was racing. Maybe it was all a rumor, or maybe it wasn't. That night, she found herself alone with Mariana in the kitchen. She decided she could no longer avoid the subject. Her tone of voice was one of genuine concern. "Mariana, I need you to be honest with me. Are you pregnant? Mariana's world collapsed. Her pulse quickened. She was short of breath for a moment. She tried to maintain her posture. Me, pregnant. Imagine. But Beatrice knew that girl well. She approached and held her hands. You can trust me. It was as if Mariana's last support was ripped away. She broke down in tears. Forgive me, Donna Beatrice. I don't know what to do. Beatrice hugged her protectively. She was sure that soon everything would become even more complicated because the hole was bigger. Vitor could hear everything from the hallway. His heart sank. He knew he would have to reveal the truth. The baby carried the Cardoso blood. The baby was his. But would he have the courage to tell her? Or would he wait for the inevitable explosion? Mariana's secret grew bigger every day, as did her belly. Her fear grew, and she had no idea that she was about to face the hurricane that would change her life forever. On the night of the grand dinner at the Cardoso mansion, everything came to a head. Mauricio liked formal events to show off his influence, inviting his family to participate. The table was impeccably set. Silverware and glasses sparkled under the light of the chandeliers, and the rare porcelain displayed the grandeur of the clan. He presided over the center, as usual, cold and indifferent. Beatrice, by his side, tried to lighten the mood, but his mind was spinning with turbulent thoughts. If Mauricio found out about Mariana's pregnancy, how would he react? Vitor was in constant distress. He knew that at any moment the truth would explode. And then Mariana appeared to serve dinner. At that moment, Mauricio gave her a quick glance, as he usually did, but something changed. His eyes narrowed because he noticed the way Mariana moved, trying to hide a slight bulge in her belly. He slowly placed his cutlery on the plate and leaned back in his chair in a silence that made everything stop. Beatrice felt her heart race. Vitor held his breath. Mariana stood still. Mauricio's voice, icy cold, echoed in the hall. Mariana, what does this mean? She froze. I don't know what you're talking about. He pointed his finger at her belly, his expression filled with contained fury. You're pregnant. Mariana couldn't speak. Beatrice closed her eyes, already sensing the worst. Vitor held his breath, afraid of his own cowardice. Who's the father? Mauricio asked, his voice low but filled with anger. Mariana was unable to answer. How could she say it? The hesitation irritated Mauricio and made him stand up abruptly. Speak now. She tried to stammer, but it was in vain. No, I can't. Enough. He exploded. Do you think you're going to get pregnant and stay here pretending nothing happened? You're delusional. I won't allow that kind of shame in my house. Sir, please, shut up. His words sounded sharp, and the final sentence was even crueler. Get out of here now, you and that son of yours. Those words fell like a curse. Mariana felt stabbed. In desperation, she looked at Vitor, begging for defense, but nothing came. He remained silent, leaving her alone. With trembling legs, she ran to her room, tidied up her things in a haphazard way, and went downstairs in tears, crossing the living room as if the mansion were physically expelling her. Beatrice begged Mauricio to give up on that decision, but he was adamant. If you want to help her, go with her, because that woman will never set foot in this house again. Mariana left, humiliated, under the sky that, at that exact moment, poured down rain, as if it were also crying for her. Vitor watched her disappear into the darkness. His conscience weighed heavily on him, but he didn't have the courage to face Mauricio. Now the worst of it was done, and without Mauricio knowing, he had thrown his own nephew out. The emptiness in the mansion dominated the atmosphere. Mauricio erected the walls of silence, but behind his unshakable expression, an uneasy premonition was forming. A feeling that somehow this decision would have a high cost. Outside, Mariana carried her suitcase, tears falling non-stop. The rain was soaking her. She felt betrayed not only by Mauricio but also by Vitor. because in the end, she was alone. And inside her there was a life pulsing, innocent, that had just been thrown out into the street. But deep down in her chest, she knew that the truth always finds a way to come to light. And when that day came, Mauricio Cardoso would have to face his worst mistake. The hours passed, but the tension in the mansion did not. Beatriz tried to hide her depression, but it was impossible. She felt a tightness in her chest, and when she came across Vitor, she could no longer hold it in. "Look at me and tell me what you're feeling, Vitor." He looked away, embarrassed. "You don't understand, Mom. But she noticed in his face a guilt greater than simple remorse. Beatriz's voice almost failed. "Please, my son, tell me it's not true." Without an answer, Vita trembled. Then Beatriz understood everything. Despair tightened her chest. "It's yours! This baby is yours!" She didn't know whether to be furious or shocked. "Oh my God, we kicked your son out!" Vita just lowered his head, tearing up. "Forgive me, Mother. I was scared." Indignation mixed with suffering overcame Beatriz. She thought about all the times she had tried to protect Mariana and how Mauricio had acted cruelly. Now it was clear. Her grandson had been mercilessly thrown away without even having the chance to be born into a safe home. She ran out, eager to face Mauricio. She found him locked in his office as usual. Her voice came out almost like a shout. "Do you have any idea what you did?" He barely moved his eyes. "I did what was necessary. You kicked out your nephew's mother." Mauricio, who had maintained an impassive posture, clenched his jaw. "What?" "The baby is Vitor's, your brother," Beatriz blurted out, ready to hurt him with the truth. He turned pale, standing up suddenly. "This can't be. It's reality. He expelled his own nephew, Mauricio." He ran his hand over his forehead, dazed. For a second, his eyes showed a spark of humanity, but then anger overcame him. "Vitor, that idiot!" he shouted. "How could he get involved with a maid? This is a disgrace to the Cardoso family." "Shame?" Beatriz retorted, exalted. "The only shame here is what you did, throwing a pregnant woman out like she was trash." Mauricio remained silent, but that accusation upset him. It was impossible not to remember his father Antonio, reminding him at every step that love was the ruin of any man. He had spent his life wishing not to become a monster like his father. But at that moment, reality hurt. Was he repeating the same story? The months dragged on, and Mariana was forced to rebuild her life from scratch. A small, cheap apartment became her home. At Beatriz's insistence, she received a little financial help, but nothing too daring. Mauricio forbade any open approach. However, each day was a new struggle. The bills, the loneliness, and the constant advance of the pregnancy. However, if one thing remained firm, it was Mariana's strength. Amidst the difficulties, she found hope in the child growing inside her. When she thought about the past, she remembered how she had been chased away and felt a bitter taste, but she also remembered Vita. Despite everything, he was the father, and she could not simply erase him. Time passed, and one night, the time came. Under a storm, Mariana went into labor alone. She felt excruciating pain, her body trembled, and she was terrified of having no one to help her. Each contraction made her fear for the baby. Unable to even walk, she dragged her hand to the phone and called Beatriz. "Donna Beatriz, I'm in labor." The desperation in her voice was evident. Beatriz didn't think twice. She ran to the car. Vitor, who saw her leave in a panic, understood immediately. For the first time, he fought against his own fear and decided to go with her. When they arrived at the hospital, the wait was terrifying. Vitor paced back and forth, distressed. Beatriz prayed in silence, until the baby's first cry echoed in the hallway. A loud cry full of life. The relief was instantaneous. He was born. Vita could barely speak. A nurse appeared with a restrained smile. "Congratulations, he's a healthy boy." Beatrice felt a mixture of joy and emotion. Vitor entered the room. He found Mariana exhausted but holding her son. She looked up. There was hurt, there was sadness, but there was also love in that moment. He came closer, looking at the baby in her arms. "What's his name?" Vitor asked, swallowing hard. "Lucas." With a choked voice, he touched his son's small hand. "Lucas, welcome to the world." Mariana was still hurt, but she saw the sincerity in Vitor's eyes. She knew he would have to prove his worth. Now that his son was there, life was taking a new direction, and there was hope that things could change for the better. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Mauricio had a restless sleep. An unknown malaise took over him, as if something was missing. He didn't understand why he thought about it so much. But every time his thoughts wandered back, he remembered the night he had thrown Mariana and her baby out. Although he would never admit it, he felt a strange weight on his chest. The days went by. Mariana, now a mother, devoted herself entirely to Lucas. The apartment was simple, but she decorated it with love. Beatrice tried to visit her often, bringing clothes, supplies, and lots of affection. She couldn't say out loud that she loved that boy, so as not to openly challenge Mauricio. But in practice, she already did. Vitor became more involved, trying to fix the mistake he had made, even though Mariana didn't seem completely ready to forgive. The fear of being abandoned again haunted her. And Mauricio, increasingly restless, kept thinking about his nephew. It didn't make sense to him, but the images of that baby, whom he had never seen, filled his dreams. One afternoon, he noticed his mother leaving a simple building with a bag of children's clothes in her hand and an emotional look on her face. He became suspicious and, the next morning, parked on the other side of the street, observing who lived there. That's how he found out Mariana's address. He decided to go up, but without knowing what to say. He knocked on the door. When Mariana answered, she froze. "You..." Mauricio entered without asking permission, his brow furrowed. "I saw my mother leaving here. What's going on?" She tried to dismiss him. "That's none of your business. Go away." At that moment, a baby's cry echoed through the house. Mauricio held his breath. He followed the sound and came across a little chair in the corner of the room. There was Lucas, tiny, fragile, and Mauricio was shocked. The baby's face looked so much like his own in old photos. He left without saying a word, but that scene would haunt him in a way he never anticipated. At the company, Mauricio forced himself to immerse himself in reports and meetings, trying to drown out the memory of his nephew. But every night, sleep betrayed him with images of Lucas. It was unbearable. At the same time, he realized that something was different inside him, a confusing feeling that grew like a fissure in his heart. Beatrice, knowing her son, noticed the changes. He was quieter, fiddling with papers without paying attention, his gaze sometimes wandering without focus. In the mansion, he would isolate himself for long periods, mulling over his thoughts. Until, one day, she decided to put him in charge directly. "You walked near Mariana's apartment, didn't you?" Mauricio dodged. "What idea is that?" "I know you, Mauricio. You're restless. Why don't you just admit that you care about Lucas?" He couldn't answer. Maybe because he wasn't even fully aware of what was happening. But the truth was that the baby lived in his dreams without asking permission, breaking down the emotional barriers he had built since childhood. Vitor, in turn, dedicated himself to winning Mariana back. He arrived at the apartment with supplies, spent time holding Lucas, and tried to show himself to be a real father. Mariana was still hesitant to hand him over to his father without fear, but she appreciated the changes. Meanwhile, Mauricio was trying to find a way. He even drove towards Mariana's building, parked but couldn't get up. One of those times, he saw Vitor playing with Lucas on the balcony and felt a lump in his throat. Lucas's smile was pure and radiated something that Mauricio couldn't define. Before he realized it, he felt envy. Not for the money, but for the simplicity of a genuine feeling. That haunted him. Until one night, when Beatrice called to say that Lucas had been taken to the hospital with a high fever, Mauricio didn't hesitate. He ran to the hospital, out of breath. He found Vitor and Mariana in the waiting room, both distressed. The fear in their eyes was palpable, and for the first time, Mauricio discovered that he was afraid too. Afraid of losing that baby who, by all indications, was innocent of all the adults' disagreements. When the doctor authorized entry, Mauricio felt his pulse quicken. He went to the room and saw him. Lucas was quiet, eyes half closed. Mariana was holding him, while Vitor seemed shaken. But the fever had gone down, and the boy was no longer in danger. Not knowing what to do, Mauricio, on impulse, held out his hands, and Mariana, surprised, allowed him to hold his nephew in his arms. "You'll be fine," Mauricio murmured, a shred of emotion escaping his voice. In his eyes, something appeared that no one had ever seen. Tears. Few and contained, but enough to prove that, within that man of ice, there was a spark of tenderness. From that day on, Mauricio would visit Lucas. The first visits were short, a bit awkward, without much interaction. But over time, he became more comfortable. Little by little, he found himself inserted into the boy's routine, trying to understand what this new feeling was. And he began to get attached, fearing what he always called weakness. But he could no longer avoid it. One day, seeing how simple Mariana's apartment was, Mauricio offered her money to buy a better house, to think about Lucas's future. He thought that would solve everything. However, Mariana refused. "We don't need your money, Mauricio." He frowned. "So what do you need?" She sighed, looking at Lucas, then back at the man who had once chased her away. "Of your love." He felt a punch in the stomach. He had no answer, because he understood that the barrier to be overcome was much greater than any financial issue. Time passed, and Mauricio began to play discreetly with Lucas, picking up a toy here and there, until one day Lucas called him for what would most dismantle his defenses. "Uncle, uncle." Mauricio froze. Beatrice, who was in the room, almost cried. Mariana was surprised. The child had just learned to speak and had managed to stammer, "Uncle," forever breaking down the walls that Mauricio was still trying to build. He was no longer the same, even though he tried to resist. It was an ex-girlfriend of Mauricio, Clara Montero, who almost destabilized him. They met at a fancy restaurant in the city. Clara hid her malicious look and said, "So it's true? I heard that the great Mauricio Cardoso has been playing babysitter." He nearly exploded. He remembered his father saying that love was weakness. He felt indignant, and the icy figure returned, if only fleetingly. But the following days showed that he could no longer maintain that old, impenetrable image. Whenever he thought of Lucas, something inside him melted, like ice in the sun. Desperate, he tried to get away again, but he couldn't erase the image of his nephew from his mind, calling him uncle. Beatrice confronted him at the mansion, accusing him of running away once again. "You spend your whole life running away from your feelings. Isn't it time to stop?" He was speechless, because the truth was painful, until Vitor sent him a message with a photo of Lucas holding a mini jacket, imitating Mauricio. When he saw the image, something in Mauricio finally broke completely. He didn't want to be like his father, who despised everything and everyone. He didn't want to live without knowing the love he denied so much. He decided to stop fighting himself. That night, he took the keys and went to Mariana's apartment. When he knocked on the door, he was anxious, but determined to finally admit what he felt. She looked at him, not knowing what to say. He simply asked to see Lucas. And from then on, the visits became daily. Between jokes and conversations, Mauricio realized that for the first time, he had found something that no amount of money could compensate for. A real bond, capable of filling an inner void that he had always denied having. Mariana, however, still carried resentment. And there was something Mauricio also needed to do: apologize. He had never even said sorry, and that hurt her. How could he act as if nothing had happened? Fate decided to make him take action during a charity event, a luxurious dinner hosted by Mauricio for important clients and businessmen. Vitor and Mariana arrived together, and she felt out of place in that exhibition setting. Near the drinks table, she was approached by Patricia Suarez, a socialite known for her arrogance. "You here? Interesting. A former employee in the middle of so much refinement." Mariana was preparing to turn her back, but Patricia continued, "I never expected to see someone like you in this circle. It's so out of place." Before Mariana could reply, a firm voice sounded behind her. "Be careful with your words, Patricia." It was Mauricio, staring at the woman with an intense gaze. The entire room fell silent. Patricia tried to smile, but Mauricio was direct. "Mariana is my nephew's mother. Respect her." The socialite blushed and slunk away. Mariana froze. Mauricio was defending her, and in public. He had just acknowledged her as part of the family, so that no one could treat her like a common maid anymore. That made her heart race. Later, Mariana left the hall, trying to breathe in the garden. That was when Mauricio followed her. He approached, his face tense. "I never apologized to you, Mariana." She held his gaze. Her chest felt tight. "No," he never asked. Mauricio took a deep breath. "I was cruel to you. I threw you out when you needed help the most. I treated you like nothing, and that, I truly regret it." She wanted to cry. This man who never admitted his faults now seemed vulnerable. She could despise him, but she had seen his transformation over the past few months, and she knew he was no longer the same. "I forgive you, Mauricio," he replied, his voice trembling. "Not because you deserve it, but because I see that your heart has finally learned to truly beat." He didn't say anything, but he felt an enormous relief and gratitude he had never experienced before. Time passed, and the pieces finally fell into place. Vitor and Mariana, who had experienced all sorts of difficulties and sorrows, realized that their love had withstood the greatest shocks. They decided to get married. That night, they gathered the family together to break the news. Beatriz couldn't hold back her tears of happiness. Mauricio was quieter, but he felt genuinely pleased to see his brother reconciled with the woman he loved. "We want you to be our godfather, Mauricio," Vitor stated, looking into his brother's eyes. Mauricio froze for a moment. He had never been one for ceremonies, but whether he agreed or not would be the final milestone in his change. "I accept." The words were dry but sincere, and everyone there understood how much that meant. But shortly before the wedding, life tested the family again. One afternoon, Lucas, now almost a year old, was running down the hallway of the apartment. One second he was full of giggles, the next a loud, terrible bang echoed. Mariana found him unconscious, his body limp and unresponsive. She screamed for help. Vitor rushed to the hospital. In a panic, they took him to the hospital. The news reached Beatriz, who immediately contacted Mauricio. He dropped everything he was doing and ran to the hospital, so desperate that he barely thought about driving carefully. When he arrived, he saw the fear on Vitor and Mariana's face. He was overcome by a feeling of helplessness he had never known before. Would he lose Lucas? The time in the waiting room seemed like torture. When the doctor called, the three of them entered the room. Lucas was pale, but the doctor announced that fortunately he was not at any great risk and only needed observation. The tension gave way to a wave of relief. Mauricio approached and, without thinking, took his nephew's little hand, whispering with a choked voice, "Stay with me, please." A tear ran down his face, a simple gesture, but full of meaning. Lucas opened his eyelids, letting out a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. Maurizio, unable to contain his emotion, burst into tears and finally understood completely what it meant to love someone unconditionally. The big day had finally arrived. Vitor and Mariana's wedding would take place outdoors on a lawn full of flowers at sunset. It was not only a celebration of the union of two people, but also the renewal of a family marked by so many wounds. The white chairs were filled with guests, all eager to witness this new beginning. Beatrice was smiling from ear to ear, visibly moved. Vitor stood at the altar, his eyes radiant, waiting for the bride. Mariana appeared dazzling in an elegant white dress, walking down the aisle. But what caught the most attention was not the dress. It was Lucas, who was walking hand in hand with Maurizio. The man who had previously thrown her out with contempt was now guiding the boy to the altar, like a protector. When they reached the end of the carpet, Maurizio let go of Lucas's hand and watched him walk towards Beatrice. The little boy looked at him with a smile, and Maurizio smiled back. That simple act symbolized the breaking of all the darkness that had existed between them. Then quietly, Maurizio murmured, without fear of being heard, "I love you, boy." The sentence moved those present. Beatrice held Lucas in her arms, tears flowing freely. Vitor and Mariana looked at each other, understanding that at that moment all the pain and regrets dissipated. It didn't matter how much Maurizio had fought against his own feelings, because now it was clear that he had been overcome by love. Yes, the cold and distant man who had once humiliated a pregnant woman had finally allowed himself to feel something genuine. His gaze upon Lucas conveyed the certainty that, regardless of the mistakes made, there was a more hopeful future for that family, now united. Today, Maurizio Cardoso is no longer that millionaire with a hardened heart. He learned that life is not about contracts and profits, but about true relationships and connections. And all of this happened thanks to the persistence of a baby who could not even speak, but who managed to touch the soul of a man who believed it was impossible to love. If this story of redemption touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. After all, love can come from where you least expect it and change everything forever.